This Maryland Senate Bill 669 is also known as the Pregnant Persons Freedom Act of 2022. Pregnant persons. Well, we used to call those women, right? But you see, that's cisgender bigotry now, if you say that. According to Olivia Summers at the ACLJ, the bill also proposes a revision of the fetal murder manslaughter statute that would serve to handcuff the investigation of infant deaths unrelated to abortion. This is because the legislation prohibits investigations and criminal prosecutions for women and medical professionals for a failure to act in relation to a perinatal death. Not prenatal, I said perinatal. After birth. In other words, a baby born alive and well could be abandoned and left to starve or freeze to death, Olivia Summers wrote, and nothing could be done to punish those who participate in that cruel death. She said that the language used is unclear. There you go. That's what I was just telling you, right? You have to be unspecific, right? You have to be nondescript in your language. Because if you're very descriptive and you're very articulate and specific with your language, then the left gives away the linguistic game, right? And then the moderates go, screw you, I don't want to have anything to do with your infanticidal bigotry. Okay, so what does she mean by the language is unclear? The law could be interpreted to, quote, prevent investigations into the death of infants at least 7 days after their birth and may extend to infants as old as 4 weeks. So if you saw the headline saying Maryland proposes bill to allow killing infants up to 28 days after birth. Well, 28 days would be 4 weeks, right? Now, where are they getting that number from? If the bill is not specific in its definition and use of the word perinatal, after birth, then what standard or definition are they relying on in their use of the word perinatal? Okay. Olivia Summers from the ACLJ says the Maryland Code does not define the word perinatal, but a 2020 law does define perinatal care as, quote, provision of care during pregnancy, labor, delivery, and postpartum and neonatal periods. Well, that would be after birth, postpartum and neonatal. So she's saying a 2020 law defines perinatal care to include post-birth. And then if you go to Medicine Net, right, a website owned by WebMD, they give a definition of perinatal as, quote, the 20th, to include as the 20th and 28th week of gestation to 1 to 4 weeks after birth. So from 20 to 28th weeks of gestation to 1 to 4 weeks after birth, hence the 28 days being 4 weeks. So this law is very clear in its refusal to define what they mean by the word perinatal. And so when you apply the law with its open-ended language, you could have a legal scenario in which a mother abandons her infant or demands that the abortionist kill her baby born alive during a botched abortion, or simply refuses to care for her infant within 28 days after birth, and there would be no legal recourse. There would be no legal punishments for a mother's actual murder of her infant. So that's the breakdown of that law. Now, listen, the intellectual class, okay, the pro-abortion philosophers, they have been clear for a long time. They have built out the consistency of their philosophy, meaning that they know their support of abortion, when consistently applied, ought to include the permissibility to abandon infants as well, because the moral properties on which they ground personhood would be properties that the infant also lacks, right? Whether it's self-awareness or consciousness, right? Or desires, a sense of self. Some of the attributes, cognitive abilities, and functions that the left says the unborn must meet before they're a person would also be cognitive abilities and functions that the infant fails to possess as well. So my point is that ideology is a hell of a drug, and people tend to live out the conclusions of the premises that they've adopted, even though they may not realize that they've adopted those premises, right? Which is why C.S. Lewis said that the most dangerous ideas in a society are not the ones being argued for, they're the ones being assumed.